Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Terry Freeman on her 6 years leading the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us as we continue to do the show remotely. We are joined today by Terry Lee Freeman, president of the National Civil Rights Museum, along with Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. Terry, thank you for being here again, but I will say I'm mad because you're leaving. You have been at the Civil Rights Museum for 6 years, and I should be objective, but I won't. But you are going on to great things, it sounds like, in Maryland. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But first, can we talk about, I guess, over your 6 years, which has been a pretty amazing 6 years in America, in Memphis and so on, your biggest accomplishment when you look back?
Well, thank you, Eric. I appreciate being invited on the show today. And it certainly is bittersweet, frankly, for me. When we talk about my biggest accomplishment, it's really hard because there's so many things that I think that have happened at the museum that I'm very proud of. But it would be natural for me to say that the greatest accomplishment from an event perspective was MLK 50. Which was truly an international commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. And we tried to make it really inclusive for the community as well as the nation to participate in that commemoration. So I think, just by virtue of its size, by virtue of the number of days that it covered, I would say that, yeah, probably MLK 50. That said, one of the things that I think from a content perspective that I'm really, really proud of is our dialogue series that we started now 4 years ago called Unpacking Racism for Action. And it really is a 7-month dialogue series on the issues of implicit bias and systemic racism. And it is a cohort-based program that was our brainchild to have people come together and have these difficult conversations about race and class and gender and ethnicity and racism and all of these things that are often they're often highlighted in everything that we do, but we don't want to talk about it. So that we are now in the 4th year of it, that we are now actually doing it virtually and serving people not just in Memphis, but around the country. And in fact, we have 2 members in the class this year who are residing in Canada. It's a proud achievement to know that the museum is having that type of impact on people.
I mean, I was making just some notes of things that have happened in the last 6 years. I mean, obviously the MLK 50, things that happened at the Civil Rights Museum, but just in the country or locally in terms of race and the conversation about race and equality. And, Black Lives Matter, the protests this summer, I think Ferguson was 2014, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously the bridge protest here, the Frazier protest a summer ago, a very different conversation about race when President Trump was elected, and that brought race forward in a whole new and different way. I mean, I think is fair to say. So in that 6 years, how has, I mean, because the Civil Rights Museum is not just a Memphis institution, it is literally, a national institution. I think sometimes people are very proud of the Civil Rights Museum in its place here, but that you are part of that national conversation often. How has that conversation changed nationally? And over time, we'll get to Memphis.
Well, I think that mostly is that we're talking about these issues so much more. And it is totally acceptable to be having these conversations. There has been a lot that has gone on from the moment that I got in Memphis. I got here on November 3rd, 2014. The next day was election day. When I arrived, we had the issue of Ferguson, as you mentioned. We had Baltimore. We had a series of things. We had Dallas. So many issues that have occurred across the nation on this issue of race, racial bias, racism, social justice or social injustice. And it has just been kind of this reverberation throughout the nation that, in a lot of ways, many people believe has culminated in what has been 2020. One of the things I'll say that over that course of time is that the museum became more and more public in how it engaged with the community around these issues. One of the very first public events that I recall at the museum was a die-in around the Eric Garner and I Can't Breathe in the courtyard of the National Civil Rights Museum. That was one of the very first things that I can recall, and then they just got bigger and bigger. In 2017, was it, following the election of President Trump, when we had the Women's March. The Women's March ended at the National Civil Rights Museum. And I'm not certain that anybody expected that there would be quite as many people come out to that as they did. It was thousands, many thousands of people that came out to that march that ended at the National Civil Rights Museum. And those events just kind of continued. And the museum has become, I believe, Eric, truly a symbol for protest, organizing, action,
Yeah.
some type of action involved with ensuring that freedom, which isn't free, we continue to move forward to secure freedom for all people.
Let me bring in Bill Dries.
Terry, as we record this, the Freedom Awards are going on this evening. The Freedom Awards going on even in this age of COVID. Talk a little bit about how that works this year.
Well, I should, Bill, let's make sure that people understand that this is a Freedom Award tribute, because we were not able to have the Freedom Award in 2020 due to COVID-19. It is, as you know, a very social event, the Freedom Award. It requires people to be in close contact. And that was not something that we wanted to encourage, nor do I think anybody would want to participate in. But what we didn't want to do was to allow a year to go by without people thinking about what the Freedom Award has been and what it has meant to Memphis, but in general, what it has meant with regard to highlighting people who are doing incredible work or who have done incredible work over the course of their lifetime. So what we are doing is a Freedom Award tribute that will really kind of be a best of type program, where we will go back from 1991, which was the first Freedom Award, through 2019, which was the last Freedom Award that we've had, and pull out some of the best of our honorees, speeches, entertainment. We'll also highlight the student forums that have taken place over the course of time, just to make people understand, or help people understand, that this is what we do through the Freedom Award. This is what the National Civil Rights Museum does. And for them to actually have a placeholder for hopefully 2021, which will be the 30th anniversary of both the museum and the Freedom Award. And our intention is to have an in-person Freedom Award in 2021. I think it's going to be really a fabulous virtual program, and a nice way in many ways to bring in the holidays for people looking back over the course of 28 years, I guess, 29 years of Freedom Awards.
Mhm. And there's a video montage that's been up on social media that shows some of the people who have received these awards in the past, from Nelson Mandela to Bono, um, uh, just everyone you could think of. Lech Walesa, an early recipient of the award as well. But it's not just all about big names. There are activists who people's name whose names people might not recognize who come in as part of this. And the award has evolved over the years. It's always been about the heritage of the civil rights movement, but it's also moved to talk more about the issues of the day as
Mhm,
well.
mhm. Absolutely. I mean, I think, and it's, I shouldn't say this because I shouldn't pick favorites, but I think everybody probably who has been to a Freedom Award has some favorite. And I have to say, one of my favorites is a recent one, and that was someone whose name was unfamiliar, Hafsat Abiola, from Africa, and the work that she was doing with women on the continent was just incredible. And she was so moved by what she saw at the museum and receiving this honor. I thought that her words were meaningful. And again, it was someone who people were not aware of the work that she was doing. They weren't aware of her history and how she was orphaned, basically, both of her parents being murdered. And the drive for which she felt women needed to be empowered. I think oftentimes we think we're aware of what is being done on these issues of civil and human rights, but there are so many more people whose names we really don't know, who deserve to be recognized. And the National Civil Rights Museum really does try to draw out some of those people to make a balance actually between those names that are very familiar and those names that are unfamiliar. It's
Right.
important too for, I think, the young people who participate in the student forum to understand that while you may have heard of John Legend and the work that he's doing, listen to this story from Hafsat Abiola and hear what she is saying and how her work is pivotal, and understand that you can be just like her, or frankly, just like John Legend, because you're given the same things that they are given. It's just a matter of acting on it. So it's an important event to raise awareness, but also provide some level of empowerment to the young people who get a
Mhm.
chance to interact with these folks.
Right. Before I send it back to Eric, that's one of the things about the National Civil Rights Museum that I think people understand once they see it and see the depth of it, especially since the renovation and expansion that took place about 6 years ago, is that yes, the modern civil rights movement, as we know it, is at the core, but there is so much more to it in the way of context that I think started out at the museum's origins as kind of framing that main narrative. Now it's actually started to become more of the narrative proper.
Mhm. And, I think to not do that is actually to limit the discussion of what civil rights is and what it means. Because to think that things may be ended at a certain point is to either suggest that there was great success or great failure, it depending on how you look at it. And I think really the great success is that continuing desire to build upon what was started in that mid 20th century movement. And in fact, I believe that many of the people who are reflected on the walls of the National Civil Rights Museum would be very happy about the organizing and that continued movement and struggle for freedom and for justice and for equality. They'd be really pleased at what they are seeing with regard to the people and the power that they are trying to exert on these issues. Likewise, they'd be very disappointed to see where we are in this country with some of those things that they thought they had secured, and some of those things that they thought were now we're looking in the rearview mirror that we are beginning to see in front of us again. So it's really important, Bill, that the museum continue to make this connection between the past to the present, looking toward the future. I think that is like a critical part of the museum's mission.
You've been here 6 years, and let's narrow down to Memphis for a second. And how, if at all, has the conversation about race and equality and the legacy of everything from redlining to slavery to Jim Crow and all of that, has that conversation in Memphis changed over the last 6 years?
I think there is probably more of it. I don't know that the conversation has changed because I don't know that there's been enough movement towards some of the issues that that people want to see addressed. I think the conversation around supporting and contracting with Black-owned businesses, Black-owned vendors, has been one that has been really in the forefront of equity conversations. The conversations around living wage, which I don't know that we've made as much progress again as we would like to see if you are looking at the bogey of $15 an hour. For me, when I think of living wage, I'm thinking about the wage, I'm thinking about the benefits, I'm thinking about the whole package for people. So I'm not certain that we've made as much progress there. There have been some symbolic wins that have certainly occurred, like the removal of the Confederate statues. And there has been, from my vantage point, a lot more involvement and engagement with community. And I think it's because the community has pushed for that, right? They have pushed to be more involved in a lot of the issues that are facing this community. I think one of the unfortunate, well, there are lots of unfortunate byproducts from COVID, but two that stand out for me are these issues around housing and what's going to happen when people are beginning to get evicted, and how are we going to address those issues. And the second is around education and what this virtual learning piece is doing to children who are having to, in many ways, suffer through this. And a lot of those children, in fact, the bulk of those children who are going to have to deal with these issues are children of color. And the learning loss that is going to be associated with this time frame. And I'm hopeful that the community will really push forward to say, we need some way to ensure that our young people are going to be able to be caught up to where they need to be, and that the competition between those who are in schools that are publicly funded versus those that are private schools is going to be an equitable situation, that we are going to be ensuring that these young people are getting what they need. I'm very, very concerned about where our young people are going to be after this next school year that's going to end sometime between May and June. And I think it could have long-term repercussions if we don't push for some type of interventions. Same goes with the housing situation. I'm very nervous about that as well.
Yeah, the federal moratorium on evictions is set to expire very soon. And even as we record this Thursday morning, the number of people on claiming unemployment nationally, I think, was just about at 900,000. It is growing again. And obviously there's a kind of dam building with the evictions and other things that are potentially about to expire. I'm going to stay with Memphis for a second. And we talked about some of the protests, and obviously, you know, the bridge was shut down some years ago. It was that 4 or 5 years ago now. Other things have, and so there have been big protests in some circumstance. But I was really struck, you brought up the Confederate statues being removed. There was a tremendous amount of debate in the sort of political world, but it felt to me, and maybe I'm missing it, you know, that when it happened, there was very little resistance locally. The resistance came from outside Memphis, but that there's very little mourning or fighting against the bringing down of those statues. And there are other moments in Memphis where that's the case, where you know, the protests this summer here were much smaller than other cities. Thankfully, not particularly, I mean, very little violence or, you know, any kind of real physical confrontations. Does that say something, do those kinds of lack of mass protests here say something good about Memphis or something bad about Memphis, or is that not even the way to frame it?
I really don't think that's the way to frame it. I don't think size has anything to do with it. I think the sentiment behind it is what is so important. I think the fact that there was not a lot of pushback, frankly, when the statues came down is because the majority of people thought it was the right thing to do. And it was the right thing to do, and that the home that they would have needed to be someplace outside of a public setting in a city that is majority Black. So I think that's a good thing. With regard to the protests this summer, I don't think we judge protests based on the numbers. I think we judge protests on their effectiveness. And the protests that occurred this summer, or over the spring, I guess we should say, and summer of 2020, looked very similar to protests across the country. What seemed to be highlighted, though, in the media was that which happened actually post the protest hours, right? Which was fringes that were creating a significant amount of chaos in a variety of cities. What we didn't see that much of that fringe. What we saw were the people who were dedicated to protesting the issues that were facing community around the country. And that was ensuring that Black lives meant as much as other lives, and that in fact steps would be taken to figure out how we do some things differently around policing and around community. So I don't think that demonstrated anything other than the size, I guess is what I'm saying, didn't demonstrate anything, except that the people who were engaged were really engaged. I thought it should have been a very proud moment for Memphis, and that people stuck with it for as long as they did, and that there were some demands that were put forward, which hopefully are being addressed in some way, shape, or form. I do think that it can't be a moment. It really does have to be something that there is momentum, and that people are looking at, okay, this is what we said we were going to do. So what are the steps that are being taken to do that? And that's not just Memphis, that's across the country.
Let me, I could talk to you for a whole other half an hour here, but we actually only have a couple minutes left. And so with apologies to Bill, I want to just touch on a couple quick things about the museum itself. That the museum is also a business of sorts, right? There was a $27 million renovation bill, and you all just talked about, that wrapped up as you were, Beverly Robinson was in charge and you were coming on. Talk about the state of the museum as an institution that has to generate a certain amount of revenue, right? I mean, just the reality of it. And as a tourism destination, and as an anchor of South Main, a neighborhood that is kind of certainly pre-COVID, was beginning to explode, and probably we'll get back to that after COVID. Talk about those things real quick with a few minutes left.
Well, we are no different, frankly, than other institutions that are suffering through this pandemic. You know that the hospitality industry has been hit very hard. And you mentioned tourism as you talked about the museum. Most of our visitors come from more than 150, 175 miles away from the city of Memphis. So we have depended on out of town traffic to support our admissions. They are down significantly. We had decreased our capacity because we had to to be mindful of COVID protocols. And we are probably running at about 60% of what our goal actually was. So we are being impacted. That impacts the admissions dollars, that impacts the retail dollars, and earned income is a big part of our budget. To the museum's credit, though, for when times were good, we were putting money away into a reserve. And so the museum has an operating reserve that has been able to support and sustain us. But we also have incredible donors who have continued to support the museum. And in fact, some of the social issues that presented themselves in the spring actually generated even more income for the museum from around the country.
Right.
So while people are still coming to visit the museum, it's very slow. And November was incredibly slow for the museum.
Well, again, I could talk to you for another half an hour, but we are out of time. Bill did a nice profile of you and talked about your new gig at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland, African American History and Culture in Baltimore. It is Maryland and Baltimore's gain, to say the least, and a real loss for Memphis. But thank you, and thank you so much for everything you've done with the Daily Memphian, Behind the Headlines, and other things we've done. We've really appreciated it.
Thanks so much, Eric. Thanks, Bill.
That is all the time we have this week, though. You can get past episodes on WKNO.org, or you can download the full podcast of the show on the Daily Memphian site or wherever you get your podcasts. Please join us again next week.